Welcome back to Your 1230, the only podcast where our guests tell their story with the help of 12 questions in just 30 minutes. I'm your host, Mike Solitro, and today we are thrilled to be speaking with Jerry Fu. Jerry is a conflict resolution coach who helps Asian American leaders initiate and navigate difficult conversations so that they can experience clarity, confidence, and closure. Jerry, welcome. We are really happy to be speaking with you.
Hey, Mike, happy to be here.
Excellent. Great. I want to start with difficult conversations. I don't meet a lot of people who look forward to them, who have experience with them, who want to talk about them after they happen. So how did you decide this is what I want to do?
Yeah, we joke sometimes, right? Sometimes we don't choose things, they choose us, right? And I suppose the reason it ended up being my focus was that I realized this was the one factor that was holding me back from becoming an effective leader. Because what a lot of novice leaders need to struggle with and ultimately get past is to trade popularity for respect. And I was so used to just being liked, and it works as a teammate, right? Oh, Jerry's so easy to get along with everybody. Everybody likes Jerry, until you have to hold people accountable. And whenever work goes south, you realize, okay, well, I can't just stay likable. I have to, go in there, do some digging, and figure out exactly what happened, and address and invite the person to help make sure that broken expectation doesn't happen again. From other standpoints, though, I'll give a specific example. For example, one of my early clients, her boss was passive aggressive. He tried calling her while she was at dinner with friends. She didn't pick up. And the next day, he just blows up at her. It's like, how dare you? That was disrespectful. I don't care what I need you for. It doesn't matter how urgent it is. If I need you, I need you. And I don't think you're committed to this job. And she calls me on a late Thursday night. She goes, how in the world do I try to get things kind of back to normal without possibly hitting more tripwires and possibly getting fired, right? Because you don't know. Maybe this guy blows a gasket. You don't know what kind of mine you can step on and then lose the job. She's like, I do have an exit strategy, but I need a couple more paychecks before I'm able to bow out gracefully. So how do I have a conversation with him that kind of gets things back to a tolerable point? And so we walked her through, hey, well, what exactly would this successful conversation be like? Step one, right? Are you looking for an apology? Are you looking for clear expectations? Do you want cleaner edges on the boundaries of saying, hey, anytime you call, I might be in a family emergency, and that's not disrespectful, is it? Well, no. It's like, okay, well then, how can we make sure he doesn't misinterpret your actions? Then the second step was to walk her through, well, you're going to have to initiate this. And I tell people I'm conflict averse. Like I still, I've built up this habit for so many years. You can't just unlearn that, but you can compensate for it with the right system, right? And so the second step for all of you conflict averse people out there, I'm with you. It is 10 seconds of courage, and 10 seconds of courage to say, hey, you don't have to be a superhero. Just be a superhero for 10 seconds. Can you pick up that phone? Can you send that text? Can you dial that phone? And set the ball in motion, lock the gate behind you so you can't backtrack or procrastinate or rationalize, because that's what we all love doing. And so from there, we said, okay, well, let's script your critical phrases, right? Let's say, what do you want to exactly say? Organize that on paper. Anticipate the pushback he's going to say to each of those things, and then get ready to counter. And then from there, we said, okay, step 4, rehearse, and then step 5, follow through. And so to come back to the original question, right? You realize, like if I'm struggling with this, surely I'm not the only one. And I just want to be able to give my clients a bigger voice, a bolder voice when it comes to realizing, hey, you know what, I don't have to be afraid of this. Or even if I am, I can still do something.
I really like that answer for multiple reasons, and I want to follow up on all those points there. The first being that you mentioned at the end that we all have the difficult conversations, even if we're not fans of them, most of us, and even if we don't want to relive them, there's something that we all kind of face. So being able to have that kind of 5-point strategy you go over is really helpful. And what that story illustrates is that most of us say, well, why would anybody want to work for that person? Why would they just leave? Well, you identify that's not realistic. They have an exit strategy, but they're not there yet. And then secondly, what is the ultimate goal and how can you work backwards? So have successful outcome in mind, and how can we get there, and what would that look like? So I think that's really useful, because we're all going to face difficult conversations, and kind of where you started there, we all like to be liked by everybody, get along well. But when you find yourself in that leadership, that management, the team lead role, it's, well, something has happened or is going to happen shortly thereafter. So I'm going to have a at least a plan for this.
Yeah.
Do you do you see a lot of people either that you work with or in your workplaces that kind of go from being that likable, that high achieving team member to a role where they are now in charge of that team, and this is not what I expected, or I'm going to just keep doing the things that I did and it's not working. Please help me, Jerry. Is that common?
Oh, I got a I got a fresh raw example for you, Mike.
All right.
So yeah, we recently hired a new technician out for those of you who don't know, my day job is a pharmacy manager, and it's less about the vocation as opposed to just the kind of dynamics you have. And so one of my more seasoned, experienced technicians, who is a classic, like, conflict averse, like, I just want to, get along with everyone. Please don't make me initiate anything difficult or awkward. Um, she was visibly frustrated by this new hire because the new hire was, seemed to be really shy and exceedingly passive when it came to just trying to learn the ropes and get everything going. And so, she and my other seasoned technician pulled me aside, or I pulled him aside, and we talked through this, and it's just like, okay, what's going on? We said, well, she's not meeting expectations. She's not stepping up. And it's like, okay, well, how do you want this conversation to go? Right. And so it took us a while to get the right angle. And so everyone, ultimately, my secret is that everyone borrows from Dale Carnegie's playbook. Like, we're all just doing variations on that, because I had to kind of talk them through, well, what angle are you comfortable engaging this conversation with? And finally, right, when we came across a more gentle approach to say, hey, here's the standard, here's why it's awesome, and here's why we like it. We want you to be able to meet that standard. What support do you need from us? Right. And so when you come in with an angle of, hey, here's where you are, or here's where we need you to be, here's where you are, how can we help you get there? Right. It's a lot easier for people pleasing people to engage in what they would think is normally difficult. Will it work every time? No, but in this case, right, we had to get them to realize, because they didn't have official titles, right, but we, as some consulting people say, we believe in the concept of leaders at every level, right, regardless of the title. So they were in a leadership role even without a title. And so how do we get them to process, okay, how do we come in, how do we get them to angle themselves and position themselves as someone supportive and not, like, coercive, or light that fire, right? Because sometimes that works, but not in the long term.
I like that, leaders at every level, because it gives you the practice or the preparation that you need, that when becomes real, or when this is something that you can't avoid, you do have some reps, and it's kind of that mindset that you build up. So I think that's a smart strategy, and shouting out Dale Carnegie is a good move, because you're right that a lot of the frameworks, the coaching strategies we see out there, they are remixes or updates from things in the past. And I like to joke, I was like, the dirty secret about a lot of these strategies, besides them being borrowed and evolutions of others, they mostly all the time work. But what you bring up, and you didn't say it exactly, but you talked about it, is that you need to make it not only your own, but you need to make it real for the person that you're working with, and kind of formulate it to what their situation dictates and what will work for the people involved. Because if people go wrong, is one, they put in kind of a half the effort, don't really understand what they're talking about, or two, this is a one size fits all, this is generic, and it's just going to work, and that doesn't work either. So you've obviously had success by working with people and preparing them for their next leadership role if they haven't got there yet, or teaching them, here are the fundamentals, here's what's going to happen, here's how it can be tailored to your situation. We talked a little bit before we hit record that I like the alliteration, the clarity, the confidence, and the closure. Is there one that you find to prioritize over the other? Do they come together, or is it just that they sounded good, put in the sentence there?
No, I mean, well, that's a great question, right? Because let's unpack this. Like, what is it? If we're going to emphasize one thing over any other, you can't really, because like all three of them work together. But if you were going to focus on one, it is closure, simply because of this. I'll give an example because we love examples. So one of my other clients, this is a fun one. He, at his church small group, saw a girl he wanted to ask out. So he asked her out, and she was nice enough to give him her number. And he tries calling her a couple times, and it goes to voicemail, and she doesn't respond. And then he does some research online and finds out turns out she already has a boyfriend. And right, it's like, oh, well, of course he's understandably upset. And then he's like, how do I handle this, right? And he's obviously struggling to figure out what's the angle to take, how to what kind of story is actually going on here. And so we coached him through, what exactly do you need to say? So there's the clarity. Okay, well, what exactly are you going to say? How are you going to say it, right? And then it's like, okay, do you have confidence? Do you believe in what you're about to say? That, because if you don't believe it, like, it doesn't matter like how great the words are. If you can't say it, if you don't believe in what you're saying, then don't say it, right? But the closure he got, so to close the loop on that story, turns out she just didn't like conflict either, right? She didn't like letting guys down when they want to reward their courage, and just thought that was the easiest way to just kind of get him to stop bugging her for her number, I guess. And then so once he said, when he realized, well, of course, like, don't just give me a number just to indulge me. Like, if you're honestly spoken for, like, please tell me, so you're not wasting my time or yours, right? And so he calls me later. It's like, oh, like, I'm just so relieved. Like, just you can hear the exhale like over the phone, just being like, oh, I'm so glad. This relief is better than any kind of comfort zone you could stay in, because the resentment is just unbearable after a while. That's what people like me realize. It's just like, well, I don't want to be resentful, but after enough situations where I just kind of have to act like, well, it's not such a big a deal. And then at some point the gasket just flies off, and then people are like, what happened? It's like, you let the resentment build up. So in this case, I would say, the closure is the most important part, because that is the most gratifying.
And that's really good example of why closure is important. And I wrote down a few things I want to follow up. First, it's amazing she gave him the right number, because most of the time it's easiest to give the wrong number, and kind of that's the but that very rarely is there kind of a line of demarcation, good versus bad, or people are just terrible to each other. There was conflict here because she was trying to avoid another situation. She didn't necessarily was not looking to start a conversation. Was like, this is easier for me just to give you this and try to avoid by telling, instead of having this conversation. And then instead it made it a lot worse, because now he feels terrible. He's like, what's going on here? And then we started this by saying the closure piece is most important. That's where people want to end up. A lot of times, you follow the right steps, you have a good process, but the result's not there. So if you can keep both of those things in mind, your outcome being positive is of higher likelihood. So that story kind of illustrates that I'm sure he was not thrilled to be involved in any part of it, but having a better than terrible outcome is kind of the closure he was looking for. Along with the difficult conversations and kind of conflict, conflict is another one of those terms and of those things that people will try to avoid. Going back to people pleasing, is there a way that you've seen, I don't say looking for conflict to make a situation better, but to proactively avoid a situation before it gets to this point, or to have indicators that say, before we kind of go off the rail, either as a leader or as a teammate, that say, I know where this can go. Here's what we can do now to avoid that situation. Have you seen that? And if so, what kind of experiences have you had?
Yeah. Part of it is just normalizing the conversation around preventive measures, right? Like we had a big group meeting for all our team a couple months ago, and said, all right, we got a team meeting. And then immediately, right, the first instinct, someone said this, and they're like, are we in trouble? And I said, no, this is the meeting to make sure you don't get in trouble. And then everything, and then like the tension just like deflated, right? I think about, my best friend from college. We have a really strong relationship, obviously, because we've stayed in touch since college. And I think part of it is, like you said, it's preventive maintenance. Is just, okay, what are some ground rules to make sure that disagreements don't happen? It's like, okay, listen without interrupting, right? And that's not even something we have to emphasize, because we're just good we just like listening to each other without interrupting, right? It's just a matter of just getting in the habit of letting people finish talking. And then, when something does escalate, right, it's like, well, why are we so hung up on this? So we start to kind of get curious about, like, where is this tension coming from? Is it just like some deep-seated conviction you have, what shaped that? And then just recognizing, hey, is this fight really worth losing the friendship over? It's like, well, no. It's like, okay, well, can we just agree to disagree and then move on and go back to enjoy being friends with each other? And I realize it doesn't always, sometimes that's the impasse that really just shows you where the friendship has to end, right? It's just like, yeah, you know what? Like, I can't get past the fact that there's certain, topics we are like deal breakers. Okay, well, let's just be honest with that and just don't waste each other's time, right? Or at work, I'll give an example there. Like creative, like you need healthy conflict, right? Like business is about conflict. Like your current revenue stream and your current business model will go obsolete at some point. And if you don't have that conflict when you introduce new revenue streams and new business ideas to keep the company viable, if you don't have that conversation, your company will die, right? And people don't realize the long-term cost of not addressing the conflict, right? Intel is a classic example. They used to be in memory chips. And then, when they started to get into microprocessors, and the CEO then was like seeing this pushback from people like, no, like, even though we're losing ground in the memory chips, no, this is what Intel's about. And he's like, I can't straddle two fences, because if I do that, the company will die. And, if they fired me and brought in my replacement, what would he do? And that's what gave him the clarity to realize, oh, they're going to go with the microprocessors. So he's like, well, why do I have to get fired for this to be realized? Let me just do it myself, save this job, save the company. Guess what? Worked out pretty well for him.
Yeah. Yes, it did. And I wrote down a couple of things there. Great points. The first being the question, is this fight worth? And then sometimes the answer might be yes. So we're in a conflict, and it's like, yeah, we have to talk about this, because if we don't, we're going to have that situation with the boy and the girl who can't go out for greater reasons. Yeah, we have to talk about this.
Yeah.
But the other also being, business is about conflict, and back to people pleasing and everyone's like us. That's a good and a fine starting point a lot of the times, but it's business because there's competing interests and there's companies trying to get ahead, and people don't like change. So when you're trying to kind of be the leader, the person in charge of a group like this, you're going to face conflict, whether or not you have the best intentions, whether or not you want everyone to get along, because it is going to be an environment where there is competing, if not mindsets, at least I don't want things to change. Things are good today. I don't need things different or difficult. So a really good example for that, and kind of walking us through. Changing gears a minute, before we recorded, we talked about a project that you worked on with a mutual, I guess we'll call him a colleague of ours, but why don't you tell us about the book, The Secrets of Next Level Entrepreneurs?
Yeah. It's such a blessing and a gift to be able to appear on podcasts with co-authors for this book. So yeah, I met Alex Brookman through another podcast host, actually, Angelina Carlton. And Alex, after we did a mutual session together to raise some money for a great cause, he invited me to say, hey, Jerry, we want someone to contribute to our leadership anthology for entrepreneurs. And so I want you to put together a chapter on conflict resolution for the Secrets of Next Level Entrepreneurs book we're doing. And so, yeah, I get to share some of my most poignant and painful stories, both personal and others, to show, hey guys, you know what? I think of a quote from one of my favorite shows, Warrior, where one of the characters goes, "Be grateful for your pain. It means you're still alive." And this is one of those moments where, when you have to evict a roommate, right? That's a fun one to dangle, and a couple others where you just realize, hey, sometimes experts mean you just failed at it more than other people, but it's still useful. So the book was originally a self-published opportunity. We sunk in everyone's chipped in a little bit of cash to try to make it go. And then for some reason, Wiley picked up the book. And so now, it's being distributed all over the world through Wiley as of March.
Well, the reason being, it's a well-written book with a lot of great minds coming together. That's why it is published by Wiley. So we'll definitely include the link to the book in the show notes. Alex was a wonderful guest, and it popped up and said, well, of course it makes sense. Jerry's got a great story. Alex looking for great stories to tell. It only makes sense that they've come together in this book. So very small world there. The one thing that kind of popped into my mind, though, as you were talking about sharing your conflict resolution secrets, is that sometimes people will avoid conflict by, as we hinted on with the Intel story, by not taking chances, by not pushing the envelope, by kind of embracing the status quo and almost celebrating. It's like, yeah, I don't get into arguments, or I don't, and that's a bad thing. And I think that that's something I want to get across here, that avoiding conflict or just sticking to situations that don't result in any conflict is really a stagnation of where we are. It's going to be, if not impossible, quite difficult to improve on any situation, or more likely, things are going to change without your okay, and you're going to be in a much worse position. So I was wondering, do you get any kind of pushback with, why do we have to? We talked a little bit about productivity, but things are great now. Why do I need to worry about this? Or I can just keep doing what I'm doing, the quote unquote steady Eddie, and I don't have to. I don't have to change anything. I don't have to worry about this difficult conversation. Why are you making me do this?
Yeah, believe me, Mike, I've been in plenty of situations where I've tried to chase people down and they just keep finding ways to just jump back 50 feet, where it's like, oh, I can just block your phone number. I can just not respond to your email. I can move to another city. I don't know, right? It's just, I can go to another church, or, and it's tough, because what's all the more frustrating is I can see myself, my former self, in their actions, right? Where it's just like, oh, people are upset with me. Okay, let me just run from everything, and then you realize that running from the challenge doesn't help you overcome it. And so, yeah, it's tough when people are just like, you'd never expect that success would be your greatest enemy to growth. But that's exactly it. And if you aren't getting in this habit of being iterative and continuing to get outside your comfort zone, even just slightly, just say, hey, let me test something. Let me enjoy experimentation a little more when it comes to trying out new activities or foods, or like approaches to conversation, right? Let me get better at listening. Let me try visiting a new country, right? And just getting that humility, the habit of humility, maybe is the phrase I'll use for right now. Just recognizing, hey, you know what? I understand that this is, honestly, Mike, that I haven't said this on a lot of podcasts. This is, everything in this world is temporary, right? Like, if there's anything the pandemic taught us, especially, not to bring that any more than we have to, but like, your world will get disrupted. Like, I just listened to a great session on innovation, and it's like, if you don't learn to disrupt, you will be disrupted. And that's not to like be a curmudgeon, but just to get people in the habit of recognizing, yes, comfort is only going to go so far. Please enjoy it. If you have it, great. And right, don't soak yourself in the pool to the point where you get all pruny. Like, you have to get out of the water at some point to dry off. Try.
It's a difficult visual, but yes, you're right about that. I like the former self, because I thought uh, I all his whole conversation, I thought somewhat selfishly of myself when I went from that team, high achieving team member to a manager. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. I liked it when everybody liked me. Every day now I have a conversation I would like to not have, but this is now my job. And I was terrible at it. And it's something that I'm still continuing to learn. But what made me think of is, it's important to be prepared and to have um, kind of the frameworks in mind, and to have, here's where I think the conversation is going to go. But I found, both personally and from talking to others, sometimes the preparation can psych you out, or you can think it's going to go way worse than it actually does. And it's like, well, it went so bad in my mind, I don't even want to have this conversation because it's going to go so bad. But most of the time, it actually doesn't. It's man, I thought that would be worse, and that's what happens. So how do you kind of balance it? Yes, being prepared is important, but you can't psych yourself out to avoid making that call or having that conversation.
Yeah, great point to emphasize, because yeah, like, what yeah, if you think of everything that could go wrong, you're gonna be like, oh, let me just not do it. Yeah, the concept of bookending has come up several times in coaching conversations, where it's like, okay, what's the worst case scenario and what's the best case scenario, right? And so we realize, okay, let me balance that optimism and realism, where maybe you pick the most likely three things to come up that they're going to be obstacles, right? The concept concept of a pre-mortem is not meant to deter you from doing something unless you realize, yeah, that's too big a cost for me to do. But to recognize, hey, the pre-mortem implies that you can overcome the obstacle, and I think that's the difference, is just to realize, hey, you know what, okay, I think there's a way to overcome this, even if I don't have to come up with the idea. That's the cheat, right? I don't have to come up with how to overcome, like, my own strategy to overcome this. Like, I can ask friends who've been through similar situations, right? Hey, ask for help. That's not cheating, right? The other angle is to realize, hey, you know what, even if, like, plane crashes, right, the black boxes, we always have to pull that out. We can always learn and grow and adjust. Like, this is not final unless you want it to be, right? Failure is not final unless you choose to say, you know what, I'm just not going to teach it. And that's okay. Sometimes you do have to move on, and that's a case by case basis. But I mean, I'll go back to my evicting roommate example, right? The first couple of times, it was like I would gingerly put the eviction notice letter on his door. I just hoped that he read it. And then at some point, I figured out that I realized he kept, as long as he would give me vague promises, he felt like if he could just give me vague promises that, oh, the money will, even though it's late, he'll keep giving me chances. He would never actually pay, and he wouldn't actually kick me out. And so when I told him at some point that, if you do get any money, use it to cover rent at your next place of residence, only then did he actually start packing his boxes, right? And I wouldn't have found that out unless I just kept not just like battering the ram until like the wall breaks. It is like, okay, let me take a different angle. Let me look at this really closely. Okay, let me try this angle. Let me try that angle. And then eventually, I closed every door. I was able to close every door. And don't worry, guys. I wasted a lot of time, like, just like dreading having this conversation. So, like I said, I'm not this artful dodger that avoided all the, making mistakes. I'm just saying I went through the mud and came out on the other side stronger. So if you're willing to go through the mud with me, I'll help you. Maybe not get so muddy, but you'll get there.
I'm glad you said not get so muddy and the failure part, that especially when you are dealing with things like difficult conversations, growth, leadership. It's one of those things that it is not a 6-hour course. It is not. I read this awesome book this weekend, and I'm good now. It's a never ending journey. It is hard. It is there's times you're gonna take those 2-step backs. But man, I thought I had this figured out. I did not. He's still in there. I can't get him. I can't get him to move out. I'm not sure what to say. So that when you add the stories to the frameworks, it makes it real, and it makes it realize that I can get better at this, but I'm probably going to have to keep working on it for a really long time. And then even when I do, something's going to change, and I'm going to still have to keep working at it. So thank you for keeping it real as you describe it there. Somehow, Jerry, we are already at time. Where can our listeners find you, or kind of connect if they want to hear more, or get to know you a little better?
Yeah, sure. I offer a free guide on the 5-step framework I mentioned earlier through my website, adaptingleaders.com/guide. Adaptingleaders.com is the base website. You can schedule a complimentary 30-minute call. Just tell me what you're working on. Check out the free blog, and or the guide. That you can connect with me on LinkedIn, but all the goodies and all the fun stuff to get you going is at adaptingleaders.com.
Perfect. So we will post that along with the book link in the show notes. I think we did a decent job. I mean, I jump around way too much, but is there anything I didn't ask that I probably should have, Jerry?
No, I think this was a treat, just being able to just jump around and go off on some fun tangents, and we uncovered some things I haven't mentioned in other podcasts. So, kudos to you.
I was gonna say, I'll take it as a compliment. I'm not sure I believe you that I hit all the high notes, but I will take. I would.
Fine. No, I mean, if I were to mention and end on a note, and just this is what helped me, was just recognize, hey, shift from, oh, I could never get good at this, to, well, what if I could? Because as soon as you give yourself permission to get better at something, no one says you have to be the best at it, but you can always get better. And when I saw conflict resolution as not as a fixed quality, an innate quality that either I had or I didn't, and a skill that could be improved and refined, next thing you know, now people are asking me for advice. I never expected that. So, yeah.
Well, that really is and I'm going to highlight that because that's an awesome point. That is, well, it does. it's not static. What if it was this way? Or what if it worked out this way? Or I don't have to be this level of whatever it is that I'm trying. What if I was a little bit better? What if I was 2% better? And what if I could get there? That's really a great mindset. And that is the perfect place to end. Jerry, thank you so much for joining us. I do look forward to doing this again. And until then, thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike.